Welcome to the Quality Conversation, the podcast where we explore what quality means in talent acquisition. I'm your host, Serge Boudreau, and today I'm pretty excited. I'm joined by Travis Winling, who's the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition, Contingent Operations and Strategy. I just realized that spells taco. Good job, Travis. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Serge.
Perfect. We've known each other for a couple of years, right? And you've been in the talent acquisition space for a long time. And you're
Yep.
one of the smartest person I've met in this industry because you've done like a variety of different things in TA operations. You've done analytics, you've done transformation. And
Yep.
really right now, the most, I would say, talked about topic is quality, both in candidates, but also in quality of hire. And I'm going to start with quality of hire. How do you see the data actually helping us getting closer to that goal? Because right now we're kind of measuring after the fact. Like, what's your take there on quality of hire?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it's
Yeah.
the way that we measure the outcome. It's not a clean it's not a clean version of kind of what that looks like. A lot of people will just use retention as a quality of hire metric, but I think there's so much more than that. A couple of the interesting ones that I find are a little bit easier to get like earlier in the life cycle would be what's your initial performance? Questions like, would you make the same hire again? One that I actually am super passionate about, but I haven't been able to measure at my new organization yet because we don't have the data for it, is a time to integration. So using like an organizational network analysis to basically say, how long does it take you to get to a requisite level of performance as somebody who's been doing that job before? So there's a lot of really interesting metrics. And I think quality of hire is really that composite of kind of each of those other ones. Now, if I get away from kind of quality of hire for just a second, how
Yep.
we measure it earlier in the process is actually the direction that a lot of vendors will take, which is likelihood to be successful in an interview, likelihood to kind of be successful at X stage. I think that's totally legitimate in terms of optimizing the front end of your process. I think in terms of your QBRs and really when you go back to kind of see is this delivering the value that I'm looking for, that's when you have to bring back that kind of quality of hire composite metric and use that to calibrate back to say, are we getting what we think we should be getting? So it's a combination of both at this point in the process and future state, we getting what we think we need.
Who do you think owns the quality of hire? Like, there's argument: is it talent acquisition? Is it HR? Is it the hiring
Yep.
manager? If you ask me, I think everyone owns it. But what's your take on it?
And I mean, it goes back to that kind of first year retention metric, right? Like if quality of hire is measured by first year retention, I think you get in that argument
Yeah.
time and time again because you get into, well, as a TA professional, I can only guarantee them up until the point of start. I can't do anything past that. That's honestly problematic. I think it's important to think about who owns each of those composite metrics because to your point, everybody owns a bit of a piece of this. So I would say TA is responsible for kind of getting them in the door and making sure that they are engaged when they get here. And then I think it transitions more to an HR type metric down the line.
So even before we can get to quality of hire, we have to have quality of applicants. And that has been a
Yep.
massive challenge for a lot of organizations right now because like we're seeing the lazy apply tools that are applying to thousands
Yeah.
of jobs. And over the, I would say, last 6 to 7 years, the easy apply tools from the LinkedIn's, the Indeeds of the worlds have made it really easy for anyone to apply for jobs when it's a market that is dominated by the employer and there's less jobs. It makes it even more relevant because people are applying to multitude and multitude of jobs. So right now, recruiters are telling me I'm overwhelmed by the volume. A lot of it is really poor quality. What are you doing to kind of cut through that noise to get to the really good quality candidates?
Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of cutting through all of that kind of fake applicant chatter, all of these new LLM tools that are out there that are going to write you that perfect resume, it comes down to how does an LLM actually work and how do we get away from what gives that strength? So, traditional applicant tracking systems and whatnot will look at how do the skills of the person or the applicant compare to the skills required for the job. If you can actually hide or create some uniqueness in the skills of the job, then you lose a lot of that kind of easy apply functionality because,
Yeah.
yes, it's going to kind of mirror back to how it compares. But the idea is if the finish line is different by job, by location, by company, even, then you can measure that in a way that can't necessarily be predicted in the same level of kind of sophistication. So a great example of this that we're starting to kind of move towards right now is what I would consider head, heart, and feet. So if I think about head, heart, and feet, the concept is my head are my technical skills. My heart is like that IO psych branch of science where it's like discretionary effort. What are your drivers? What are your drainers? And then feet is really the human in the loop side of things. So it's the recruiter and how the recruiter can, through their experience, probe in from a questions perspective and start to understand gaps that might exist in your head or your heart skills. So from a head perspective, that's really your traditional ATS. The IO psych then, if I can build a schema that's aligned to the culture in my particular job at my particular company, that's no longer available for an LLM to kind of pick up. That's something that is unique in terms of what the benchmark is. And that's what's going to drive kind of your differentiation. So it ends up being a composite between the two. And so, from a scoring perspective, what you'll end up doing is where I have the ability for like high change jobs, I can
Yeah.
actually focus more on the heart type skills and bringing the culture that I'm looking for, as opposed to just going heavy technical skills, which are much more easily fooled with an LLM.
So I'm curious, RBC, I'm going to make some assumptions and guesses, right?
Sure.
Large organization.
Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna guess that you get 1 million applicants a year.
You're about half that. We get about 2 million applications a year.
Okay, you get around 2 million. Have you seen that level go up in the past couple of years, or has it stayed steady? And does your strategy change when it comes to going out and doing some recruitment marketing? Because, like, do you need two
Yeah.
million candidates? Basically, is the question. So, how does your approach change based on what the marketplace is giving you?
There's a couple of different ways that I think it changes. One would be just more targeted recruitment events. So, in terms of how do we get to the quality over the quantity, in terms of the conversation that we've
Yeah,
just been having, early talent's a great example of that. We can go to a whole bunch of different schools, or we can go to a couple of targeted schools that are really our bread and butter in terms of where we know the quality candidates kind of come from. So that'll be one thing that I think we focus on is really what's our early talent strategy and what's our event strategy going forward. That's one piece. The other piece is really more from a vendor management perspective. And
yeah,
so as I start to think through who's in our database and what does that look like, our current database actually contains everybody who works in financial services from a talent intelligence perspective. If you just look numbers for numbers, we have that all in our database. So when we look at
mm,
finding new talent, that's not really the issue. It's kind of combing through the new talent in terms of what that
mm.
looks like. So where external talent sources from a candidate generation perspective, they lose a ton of value as we start to think through what that looks like. We still need that data from a talent intelligence and a trending perspective, but it's more what are our competitors doing and less about us finding the actual talent itself.
Fascinating. I'm curious when you're looking at contingent workforce, like how is it
Yep.
different from your main workforce? Like what does quality look like when you're looking at contingent? Same strategy, just a little bit different?
I would start with the same metrics and I would
Yeah.
think through what are the outer scope pieces that I can't necessarily get to with respect to those metrics. For a contingent worker, understanding that from a co-employment perspective, you're really talking about somebody who's going to be here ideally for about 2 years or less. And then you start to get into this hairy spot where they start to look a lot like an employee. So we kind of want to manage that back. So from an attrition perspective, 2 year attrition is actually kind of the finish line as opposed to the starting line with a lot of employees. So we have to kind of think through that. We start to look at performance measures. So how does the person look and feel when they offboard? Did they complete what we asked them to do at the start of their work placement? And what does that
Yeah.
look like? So that's where we get into a lot more of the quality pieces there. The other thing that I would say is with contingent workforce, it's less about managing the employee and more about managing the vendor. And
Interesting.
so vendor management becomes a really big piece of how we do this. So looking in aggregate across all the resources that are supplied for one vendor, that's really where we want to drive quality as opposed to at the individual resource level. Now, all that said, I think it is still very important for us to keep them as close to the same as we possibly can so that you can tell that total workforce picture. Like one thing that drives me crazy that I'm still trying to kind of get to the bottom of is many organizations use a separate job architecture or ontology with bill rates for contingent workers. Well, I can't tell you if a front end developer employee is the same as a front end developer contingent worker, and I should be able to. So
Mm,
that's one of the things that I'm starting to unpack is how do we get an aligned career architecture for both contingent workers and employees? And the reason that's so important is because as we think about the emergence of AI,
yeah.
that traditional talent pyramid that we always talk about with kind of your executive at the top and then your middle management and then your entry level roles, well, those entry level roles are starting to disappear. So you're effectively turning your talent pyramid into a talent diamond. So
Mm.
how do you fill in that bottom corner of that talent diamond with contingent workers and start to build them into your succession pipeline and your talent pools in terms of how that looks? So there's a ton of reasons, but I think unified job architecture is a super strong starting point in terms of where we should be headed from a future state contingent workforce optimization perspective.
How do you determine what should be contingent and what should be a full-time employee, part-time employee? Like, how is that
Yep.
assessed within an organization of RBC size?
I think it really does come down to the individual business lines because HR can't necessarily do it. I think the question that we ask from a playbook perspective is really, is this about building a competitive differentiation or is this about commoditized have to do skill set? And
Right.
where it's commoditized have to do skill set, we should absolutely be buying it because they can often do it cheaper. Where
Yeah.
it's competitive differentiation, that's who we want as our leaders of tomorrow, and that's what we need to invest in from a
Mm.
employee skill set perspective. And so that's, I think, my guiding stick, but it really depends on the individual business line.
Interesting. Travis, you've led talent acquisition strategy at a multitude of large organizations in North America. I'm really curious because I've worked mostly in mid-sized to smaller organizations in TA, and making the changes that are needed to be done is fairly quick and you can execute. But I
Yeah.
can't see that being the same for an organization like RBC. How do you come in and do the changes that need to be done to have a really efficient talent acquisition department?
Honestly, I think the larger the organization, the more it comes down to how do I use data to kind of
Yeah.
drive the outcome that I'm looking for. And so for me, in terms of reinventing a talent acquisition function, it starts with talent intelligence, which a lot of people, discount or don't even understand what it is. So
Yeah.
you start to talk about location strategy. You talked about what work should be done where, what's commoditized versus what's strategically differentiating, what work exists in each of the markets. Like I'll go back to a past example that I had where we were looking at a BPO organization and we found that in one market, the data engineering skills existed, but the data architecture wasn't there yet. The market was not mature enough at that point in
Mm.
time. So what we ended up doing is we actually ended up separating the data architecture from the data engineering, where we were able to do our engineering services in a low cost market. We still had to keep our data architecture so as to not jeopardize the business in a kind of like medium to high cost market. And the nice thing about having that conversation is you can also adjust for things like time zone. So in terms of like ways of working and making sure that the teams can still collaborate, if you keep them in the same time zone, they can still kind of work amongst each other that way. And so that's where it's putting the right talent in the right pockets is such an impactful piece that drives the right level of consultation to start to drive kind of the change in mindset around what TA actually should be. So that's the first piece. Second piece is you got to spend money to make money. So it does take investment in capability, in people, in talent. Like you get what you pay for. And I think that's where having some of these technologies and things that are what I would consider foundational, like, data partners, for example, in the labor market intelligence space. You can do your own scraping, you can do a lot of your own builds, but
Yeah.
it takes time, it takes money. And is that what you want to focus on? It generally it's not. So it's how do you commoditize those pieces and spend the money so that you can spend the time on things that are much more differentiating. The third piece is really, I'll kind of group two here. It's courage and aligned leadership. It's having those leaders at the top of the house from a human capital management perspective or an HR perspective that see draw of where we're going from a future state perspective and they understand that the jobs of today are not the jobs of tomorrow. And it's not that we're outsourcing or eliminating jobs, it's that we're fundamentally changing the way work is done. So
Mm.
a front end developer that does these 10 tasks today, they might do 4 of those tasks tomorrow and 3 different ones, but the other 6, 2 of them are going to be automated and 4 of them are going to completely disappear
Yeah.
because of the impact of AI. So it's like, how do we decompile roles into their requisite tasks and then align that to skills and then use that skill strategy to drive what is our recruitment strategy going forward? So if you have leadership that understands that foundationally, I think that's where you get the change from the top because again, without the leadership, you don't have the investment, and without the investment, you can't show the ROI to build something like talent intelligence going forward. So it really is kind of this laddered approach, but it takes all those pieces to really drive the transformation.
I think that's fantastic insight. And I know a lot of recruiters, a lot of talent acquisition managers, directors are very nervous with the current landscape of exactly what you
Yep.
described is like, how does my role fit into the future of work when it comes to
Yep.
recruiting, talent acquisition? Like, what's your take there? Like, what does a recruiter role look like in a couple of years from now? You can be
So I
honest.
think with the yeah, no, I think it's fair. I think with respect to the regulatory environment,
Yeah,
the concept of human in the loop is not going away. Automated education decision making tools, that's something that governments are telling us is no go zone. So I think we need to figure out how do we bring the recruiters along so that they can do what they do best in terms of evaluating talent because AI is only going to do certain things. Even if I think about a lot of the great interviewing technologies that are out there, they're going to do things like key moment detection. They're going to do things like calling out, this is how this aligns to the job spec. What the human's going to hear is slightly different. So when they go back and they take that 30-minute interview and they bucket it down into 2 minutes, those 2 minutes still need a human ear to kind of listen to them and say, oh, we should have asked them about this, or we should probe on this,
yeah,
or this is what's kind of missing, or this feels like a fabricated answer. There is an element of humanness that is still going to be required for assessment. So I think assessment is one piece of this. And it's where that art versus science comes in because it is an art to see skill adjacency in a pattern that doesn't necessarily exist in the data itself. So I can tell, for instance, if I know React JS, I know Java as well. Like
yeah.
I can make that correlation from a AI learning perspective. But if I think through, mathematical operators and logic, maybe that doesn't necessarily translate the same way, but it's the same skill set or it's the same thought process in terms of how it works. Or even as I think about like how primary keys work between kind of two systems, like that's a fundamental concept that might not be a skill adjacency in the data, but as a human, I can understand and see how those things relate because as learned experience for this one person, they still fit that mold. And that's the piece that recruiters are always going to have to do. The second piece that I think will be different for recruiters, though, is recruiters will have to become more consultative to show that they have value because bunching up the top 10 resumes in a rec and sending them over to a hiring manager, that's not necessarily going to be a thing anymore. So you have to think about more the front end of the process. What markets should I be working in? Is remote work a thing or not a thing with respect to this job? And can I encourage the hiring manager to get more flexible to build a better base so that the folks that are coming in to be assessed from an AI perspective and eventually a human perspective are of a higher quality than if they just said, I need to hire this person in Toronto and stop, that's it. That's going to be a lower quality talent pool. So we got to think more like marketers in terms of the talent pool and the scope of where we're going for talent, and less about the process of recruitment in terms of take these 100 people, streamline them into, these top 25, screen them into the top 10, send them over. We're going to interview the top 3 and then, make our hire. It's less about the process and more about the strategy behind talent acquisition.
I love that because I'm exactly on the same page. I really see the recruiter becoming a really good account manager. First of all, with their hiring
Yep.
managers, they have a really close relationship. They understand the needs. They know how to react, get the candidates they need quickly. But they're also managing the candidates and giving that one-on-one experience as much as you can, right? Depending on the volume.
Yeah.
But a really good account manager is, in my opinion, where a recruiter is going or the future recruiter is going to look like. I'm curious though, we're in 2025, almost at the end. the last couple of years have been a whirlwind as far as like what's happened in the space, what's happened in the world of work. And it's
Yep.
hard to imagine what's going to happen 5 years from now. So if we look at 2030, we talked a little bit about like what contingent looks like as far as like those key skill sets, and you're going to be hiring those. And there's a mentality out there that it's going to be all skill based hiring, or it's going to be all gig type work. And I know it's a big question, but like, what's your prediction for 5 years from now? What is the world of work going to look like?
You hear a lot of buzz around skills, but you don't hear a lot of buzz around task. And I think it's
Yes,
the world of work is going to get decompiled into this task-based architecture, and then the
interesting.
skills are really the next layer that's gonna sit on top of that. And that's the piece where a lot of my talent intelligence type peers have started to go that direction. And I think that's where we need to get to is what are the things that I actually need to accomplish? And then what are the likely going to be the things that I can automate, outsource, augment, kind of all of those things. I think that's where the world of work is going to go to. Where I'm going to have strategic roles and actually work for a company are going to be those high level strategy, high level consultation, human in the loop. You're almost building a higher level of subject matter expertise to be able to gut check all these new tools. Like, I think that's what the future of work is being able to look at something that's generated by, an AI researcher and say, yeah, that might be best practice, but that is never going to work given our business model, given our application, given how we're working within this industry. Yes, there's going to be disruption, but there's also going to be fundamentally things that just don't fit when you try to apply a broad-based model given your own context. Applying context is really going to be that differentiator in terms of the jobs that are left in 5 years.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm getting old 5 years from now. I don't know if I can deal with the next level, but we'll see. I got a couple of
Yeah.
quick rapid fire questions for you. I'm curious, is there a book that you've read that's changed your view on business or HR, talent acquisition? But
I'm gonna go with an oldie but a goodie, in terms of some of the ones that are out there. So the first one is Simon Sinek. Start with why. I think that one is, you know, just
fair.
fundamentally paramount in terms of making the case. And honestly, all of what we do and all of what we will be doing in the future is making a case to make a change. And we have to start with that why to really hook our reader and make sure that we're driving our value forward. The
Love it.
second book is just in terms of HR operating model and like cool things to try and think through. Laszlo Bock and Work Rules. Again, oldie but goodie. It was one of
Excellent.
those ones that, you know, you just kind of read and you're like, I wonder if that would actually work here. Given at the time that he wrote it, Google's context and Google's culture was so vastly different than so many other places. It just it gave me an appreciation to think through like, this might sound like a crazy idea, but let's just go for it. It's less about the content of the book in this day and age because I think so many things have changed, but it's a good kind of just thought starter about how you should think about problems.
Two excellent books. I would not have predicted those two books, but those are like it fits. Really good fit. Are you a podcast
Yeah.
guy or TV series? What's your thing?
Yeah, so I'm a podcast nerd for HR op models and all kinds of those fun
Okay,
things. So,
which one do
yeah,
you listen to? What's your podcast?
to be successful at work, I listen to a lot of like the Bain, McKinsey, those
Yeah.
types of things. For my own entertainment value and to stay abreast of HR tech, I'm a big Chad and Cheese guy. Like
Ah,
I love Chad and Cheese, and it's a fun spin on M&A in the HR tech space. It's just a different vibe, and it's kind of like what you do, Serge. Like it's just that funness around. You get the information, but you get it in a cool way.
hey, big shout out to Chad and Cheese. I'm a big fan. They really got me started in podcasting from listening to their podcast. So, yeah, full kudos.
Awesome.
I think it's still one years after. I'm probably 6 years into listening to Chad and Cheese. I still every Friday I'm listening. So, kudos to you guys.
Yep.
Obviously, your insights are fantastic. Your experience is exceptional. If anyone wanted to get a hold of you, is LinkedIn the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah, LinkedIn I'm pretty polished on. And I work for a financial services company, so I don't have a lot else on my phone. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to go.
Yes, please look up Travis Winling on LinkedIn. Travis, this was a lot of fun to do. I think everything you shared is something that every talent acquisition professional listening can really learn and start looking at with different ways of doing their own function. So for that, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Serge. Happy to be here.